I'm excited about this episode of the Elite Recruiter Podcast. I have a special guest, Ed Pedini, over at a company called SeekOut to talk about the secrets of sourcing. Right now, even with the way the market is, one of the biggest troubles that every single one of us recruiters have is finding the right talent at the right time that is ready to make that move. And nowadays, talent doesn't want to be on LinkedIn all the time. Talent, like they're getting hit up in so many different ways. So you have to go use some out of the box techniques to find the people that your clients need. So that way you have the success. And I am excited for Ed to come on and talk about the secrets of sourcing. So welcome to the podcast, Ed.
Thank you, Ben. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm very excited.
So one of the big things that we do first is do a deep dive into your background and how did you even get started in this recruiting space?
I think like a lot of recruiters, it was completely by accident. I was coming out of essentially a technical sales role for a startup that I'd been working at for a while that had recently been acquired. And for the first time in a long time, first time in like 10 years, I was working with recruiters, not to hire people for my team, but because I was looking for a new job. And we'd been going through the process and looking for something new. And at one point, I don't even remember how it happened. Somebody put up the conversation that, we're hiring for ourselves. Maybe you want to come and be a recruiter with us, which wasn't specifically what I was looking to do. But I figured, we're here and a little bit of interview practice never hurt anybody. So we went through the process. And interestingly enough, I discovered that it actually sounded like a pretty good gig. Like this is something that I'd been doing previously to sort of build up my team. Had a lot of domain experience, especially in startups that might be a good fit. I actually see myself doing this kind of sort of three-way sales work as opposed to the two-way sales work that I'd come from doing previously. Um, that that interview process showed me that they weren't a particularly good place to work for, but I did come away feeling that there was something to the whole idea. So I ended up taking that and going away and looking for a boutique firm that specialized in startup technical talent, which is what I really wanted to work on at the time. Found one, we liked each other, and the rest was essentially history.
It is so funny how we just kind of fall into this space.
Yeah, nobody really grows up wishing that they would be a recruiter, in my experience. But I think for the right person, it's a great career choice.
Yeah, I'm totally with you on that. I think that's like, when you're going to college and going through school, like how many different business options do they show you? And recruiting is not one of them anywhere.
Very true.
So that, fast forward, you worked at a few different places and now you're working for a company called SeekOut. Can you tell the listeners about SeekOut?
Absolutely. So we are a platform for managing talent. So for recruiters, we really help you find, identify, and hire hard to find or niche talent across a wide range of industry and roles. Using our human powered AI assisted approach that keeps recruiters in the driver's seat, but leverages AI and automation to make their lives as easy as possible. We also have a lot of products on the talent management side. So for teams and for organizations, we have solutions that help you build out your skills, implement career pathways, succession planning, manage learning and development, and give employees a really great internal career experience as opposed to the pretty dire out of the box ones that you often get. So we're covering the whole span of talent management and talent acquisition. Although in my role, I am pretty firmly focused on the talent acquisition side of what we do.
Awesome. So, and I'll just say to the listeners, I'm a huge fan of SeekOut. It is probably one of the best tools that I have seen in the cleared space when it comes to finding cleared talent. They'd use a combination of like AI and machine learning to figure out if like, some people actually have their security clearance listed, but at the same time, like they, based on data that they have, they're able to infer like who might have a security clearance. So let me give you a quick a few rundowns. On that platform, it has about 3.7 million people that is highlighted as potentially can have a security clearance. And to break that down, TSSCI full scope polys, about 69,000, CI polys, about 213,000, people with a TS SCI, over 800,000, and with a TS or secret, actually, TS is 1.4 and secret about 1.4. So like as a cleared recruiter, this tool is awesome. So sorry, guys.
No, I appreciate the shout out. We've we've always been in the business of inferring people's skills and experience, trying to use machine learning to read between the lines of what we see on places like LinkedIn and GitHub and Stack Overflow or specialist sites like Doximity. And sort of a number of years ago now, we started doing a lot more work in the A&D space. And through our relationships with our customers, we learned that there was actually a significant challenge in identifying cleared talent. Not a lot of people actually put that on their profiles for lots of very good reasons a lot of the time. And a lot of the traditional tools like the resume databases that people subscribe to, they have a relatively small subset of clear talent, and it's the same people over and over again. So if you're trying to like make net new hires or discover new talent, it wasn't really solving the problem. So our engineering team and our data team came up with a really innovative solution that allows us to understand the work that people are doing. So where people are based, the job that you have, the company that you work for, the way that you talk about your tasks on some of these sites, and then use that to infer the kind of security clearance somebody likely has. So you're working for A&D company one, and you're in Washington, D.C., and you're a data center tech, very, very likely that you must have at least this kind of security clearance to do that job. And we've been able to extrapolate that right across our entire candidate database to create what we think is essentially the largest database of cleared talent that's available anywhere right
Yeah, and talking about the job board stuff, I can't tell you how many times I've like looked at job boards over the past 17 years, and I know these people by name now. I'm like, oh, so and so's looking in on average every 3 months.
now. Yep.
Hey, how's it going?
I,
So it's
I
nice having a fresh batch of new people to dig through. So, anyways, want to dig into actually sourcing tough people.
Mhm.
And what is these like? Start off by asking you, what does a sourcing environment look like right now in 2023?
I think it is very specific to the talent pools that you're trying to work in. We do a lot of work in healthcare, and a lot of our healthcare customers are looking for physicians and nurses, and that is a really tough market right now. There are a lot of people who've burnt out or left the industry due to COVID. This is a pool that's traditionally pretty hidden. Only about a third of nurses in the country have a LinkedIn profile. So they're hard to find passive candidates that are in that space. And the recruiting teams and the people in the roles themselves aren't really used to going through the same process for passive candidate sourcing that you see in things like software engineering and other high tech roles. Um, I think that there are pockets of the market that still haven't quite recovered from some of the downsizing and hiring slowdowns that we've seen over the last sort of year and a half or so. Um, your big tech is the example of that you see in the media all the time. Although we're feeling pretty good, we're seeing a lot of signs of customers starting to rebuild recruiting teams, picking up hiring, planning pretty aggressively for 2024. So we're fingers crossed at the tail end of that. And then you've got those traditionally difficult sourcing markets that just have a huge scarcity of talent, or have very invisible talent that can present all sorts of challenges to the people who are looking for those particular great people to bring into their organization.
Well, that kind of goes into a question like for the listeners out there.
Mhm.
Like we all know the niche that we're in, but what are the niches where it's hard to source good talent for your clients and customers that
I
you
think
see?
I would probably say great talent is hard to find. It's just across the board. Um, but I think that healthcare is a really big one. There are a lot of tools that are specifically made for healthcare teams. And there are a lot of data sources that then sell to finding people who have very specific healthcare licenses or experience. Um, Healthcare is also coming from a background that's been a very maybe traditional recruiting environment. They've relied on job boards, on career fairs, on educational institution relationships, on referral programs for a very, very long time. And it was always one of those passion industries. You became a physician or you became another sort of healthcare practitioner because you love it, kind of like the same reason that people become a teacher or get into video games. So they've never really had trouble hiring. And then COVID comes along, burn out a bunch of our best healthcare providers. People stop wanting to get into the industry. Demand for healthcare talent goes up exponentially, but budgets don't get increased. So people are still working with the same recruiting teams and the same recruiting spend that they had pre-COVID. And it really was just a recipe for disaster. Recruiters are getting burnt out, roles are going unfilled. We talk to customers coming on board SeekOut who've had nursing roles open for a year and a half. They've been trying to fill like a specific nursing headcount. So the impact on the healthcare institution, the impact on patient outcomes and ability to provide the level of care and the right bed ratios that they want to provide is really significant. So I think that's one that we definitely see as being very, very tough. Perhaps um, strangely, we also still continue to see quite a struggle to find, or for recruiters to find the talent that they really want to bring into their organization in big tech. Um, I think that there are a lot more people on the market. Application volumes have gone up a lot, and it's presenting a different problem. Like now, how do I review these many applications? Or if I get 6,000 applications for an engineering role, how can I be sure that I actually submitted the best 20 to the hiring manager when I can't necessarily talk to 6,000 people? It's a whole different set of sourcing challenges. Like how do you source from an application pool as opposed to how do I go out and source passive candidates? But it's a different side of the same problem.
And before, because I know you guys do some integration with pipelining with
Mm.
applicant tracking system too, but going back to some of these jobs that, you see online and like 7,000, eight
Yeah.
thousand applicants, like, there's no way for a recruiter to be able to actually successfully give a great candidate experience to 8,000
Mhm.
people if they have like 25 roles that they're in charge of.
It's very true, and the sad part is that everybody is losing. Like people who need work and who are interested in a position are losing because it's very, very hard to be noticed amongst so much other talent. Recruiters are losing because they can't possibly provide a great candidate experience to everybody who applied in those kinds of scenarios. And truthfully, you can't even be sure that you're putting the best people forward. In that case, more often than not, you have to live with putting the best people that I actually spoke to forward. Um, and companies are losing because they don't necessarily have visibility to make sure that they're getting the best talent. And they're not really doing their employer brand any favor when you're dispositioning 6,500 applications without even reviewing them before moving on to your next role. The terrible situation actually shouldn't be minimized. I mean, it's adversely impacting a lot of people at the moment. And we can only all hope that the market picks up and goes back in the other direction. And in the meantime, try and make it as painless as possible for everybody involved.
So before we go more on sourcing, I'm seeing a
Mhm.
lot of tools on the candidate side of the house now, utilizing artificial intelligence
Mhm.
to go like mass apply. Is are we going to see more and more of that moving forward?
I mean, it's probably part of the problem, to be completely honest. I think if you talk to the recruiters who are managing those roles that are getting the 6 or 7,000 applications, they'll probably tell you that at first glance, it looks like 50 or 60% of them are somewhat irrelevant to the role, which isn't great for the person applying and isn't great for the people who actually are a good fit that are in that pool too. Um, the prevailing rumor is that at least some of this is being driven by those mass apply tools. Um, I don't really have a good sense of how much people are really using that and how much traffic is coming, from those kinds of tools. But it's a it's an interesting position we find ourselves in. On the recruiting side, we're trying to use AI and machine learning and automation to make our lives easier. Candidates are using AI and machine learning and automation to try and make their lives easier. How far away are we before it's AI talking to AI trying to make hiring decisions, which is a kind of crazy outcome. But I wonder where it's all going to end.
Yeah, I just had to ask about that because I see people talking about it. Then just over the weekend, I looked at one of my cleared postings. Security clearance. 99% of the people that apply don't have a security clearance. First of all, but then I popped in. It was like 109 new applications, and if you want a good laugh, 100 of the, I think it was 102 of them was just one person. Just it was like somehow was able to apply 102 times.
I mean, you have to feel for people who are looking for work
Hmm.
and are wanting to provide for their families and in that position. I think a lot of the advice that's going out to job seekers at the moment, especially those coming from like social media influencers, is just really bad advice. And isn't coming from a position of expertise or understanding of how these things work. And I think that particular example, nobody's going to get a job by applying the same role to 100 times. It's not helping your chances by doing sort of thing. So it's unfortunate that that kind of behavior is being encouraged without people necessarily understanding that maybe they're hurting their chances as opposed to improving them.
Yeah, unfortunately, that person didn't have a security clearance, so there's nothing I could do anyways. But I think we could have a whole another episode about LinkedIn influencers that have never done any hiring or have never done recruiting, but know all the secrets that recruiters don't want you to know.
Absolutely. I know we're on some of the same Facebook recruiting groups, and I think we see some of those posts getting shared and sort of have a laugh and shake our heads sometimes. But it's the age we live in with social media and influencers these days. It's getting harder and harder for people to understand, what to believe and what to follow and what not to.
And it's one of the reasons why I'm also like always encouraging my recruiter friends to actually also be the person out there creating content,
Mhm.
because we have to have the responsibility of at least creating a little bit of content to show what's real life and what's really happening, and how you can actually really successfully make it through the
Mm.
marketplace, the job marketplace.
I think that's great. That's super important. We should all be doing more.
So, but yeah, back to sourcing. What do you, by chance, do you know what one of the most interesting positions that somebody has found on your guys' platform, or most unique positions that somebody's been able to like snag talent on your
Oh,
guys' platform?
that's an interesting question. Um, I mean, we have thousands and thousands of customers who are using us on a daily basis, so I'm sure that there are a ton of interesting ones. Um, the I'm not going to be across them all. The one that I'm most proud of, I think, is one of our customers in the advanced medical devices space, who I'm not going to name, actually hired their global head of robotic surgery research and development from a cold email that they sent to somebody that they found on SeekOut. And I think there's a lot of cool titles. I mean, we could go through like anybody's sort of history, and we'd find sort of plenty of VPs and directors and sort of C-level folks in there. But that think about how many people in the world can possibly do that kind of work. Like that's a tiny, tiny little talent pool. Um, and it's something that's so impactful. I mean, that's a field that's developing super rapidly. That's creating sort of patient outcomes that weren't previously possible, especially for people who are in sort of remote communities or maybe don't necessarily have access to the kind of medical talent that a lot of people take for granted. So I thought it was very, very happy to see that both because I know that their sort of cost per hire ROI on that particular one must have been absolutely fantastic, but also just because it must have been such a complicated search.
Oh yeah, that's awesome.
Mm.
Is there any advice that you would give to recruiters that are looking at upping their sourcing game?
Sourcing is, I think, probably the hardest thing that we do in recruiting. It is so far removed from a lot of our other activities. It's really a lot closer to demand generation or digital marketing than it is to the rest of recruiting. Um, for me, sourcing has always meant getting the right message to the right person at the right time. And each of those three things are complicated problems. Like, what is the right message for what you're trying to hire for, and who's the right person? And there's actually, in reality, probably several different kinds of right people. And the right message for those people is different. And the time that you send the message for those people is different, and the message at different times is different. So you have this huge interconnected challenge of how do I put myself in the candidate's shoes, how do I understand what it is that I potentially can offer as an employer that is going to convince somebody that's maybe never even heard of me before to their role to come into a recruiting process to come and work with me? And then how do I shepherd everybody involved? The recruiting coordinators, the hiring manager, the interview team, and of course the candidates themselves into exploring that in an ethical way and actually making an objective decision at the end of it for all the right reasons. Um, there's no easy answer to a lot of that. And coming from a background of having trained sourcing teams, half the time I don't even necessarily understand how to explain it to other people. It either just clicks or it doesn't. But it's I think one of those skills that really just comes from deep experience in the subject matter that you're working in, and talent pools that your organization hires, and the empathy of really being able to put yourselves in the hiring manager seat, or in the candidate seat, and really understanding the things that matter, and how to showcase those in the appropriate way.
And message, yeah, I think you're right. I absolutely love everything that you said. Messaging, the time of the messaging, you know, especially for some of these these candidates with these top skill sets, like they're getting canned messages that were written like a template from the 80s and they're still using today. How do you stand out to be different, to be the one that gets the response, whether you have a phone call or an email or a
Yep.
message or a postcard?
Absolutely. And my approach was always to be heavy on information and transparency. And there's no single way of doing this. There's a lot of different sort of outreach methodologies that work. But I did a lot of my recruiting in the tech space, specifically with tech startups. So you're maybe sometimes got a garage and a couple of VC dollars, and you're going to somebody at Amazon with a package that's 5 times higher than you're currently offering, and saying, "Hey, you should really come and try this instead." So that's a tough sell. Um, and in that industry, a lot of the value coming to do a role like that comes in some really specific places. So if you're leaving an organization like Amazon, you're coming to work for a small tech startup. There's value in the fact that you can work directly with founders. Like you're going to be like sitting in the same open office with the CEO, the guy that just convinced Madrona Venture Capital to give him $60 million. So clearly knows at least something. And you guys are going to work through this, and you're going to end up with a big network of VC connections if that's something that's in your future. Or maybe you're leaving an environment where your job is to take these 500 lines of code, and spend the next year trying to squeeze zero point 0.1 of a microsecond of performance out of it, into an environment where you're working across an entire code base, and get to do something that's hugely impactful to the entire customer experiences. A million other reasons that could potentially come up. The the secret is to find the ones of those that are actually true and real, as opposed to the ones that actually sound nice, and find the people who want those things for the next step in their career. And that could be a title change, it could be a relocation, it could be more money, it could be more responsibility, it could be less responsibility. It could be working with a CEO, it could be VC connections, it could be a tech stack, it could be learning and development opportunity. They're literally endless. Um, but the hard part, I think, is often understanding what just sounds good or what we say about ourselves, versus what it actually is, so that people who come across find that it's true and stay and go on to be great employees. I think if you can figure that out, and really get to the truth of it, there is an opportunity for everybody, and there is somebody for every job. And sort of bringing those connections together is really what we're doing as sourcing professionals.
Yeah, good. Love that. I can't wait to replay that on video.
Hopefully, it
Awesome.
sounds good the second time around.
Well, and it's going to be kind of a similar question, but in the cleared space for my
Mhm,
fellow cleared recruiters out there, what sourcing advice would you give
mhm.
to a recruiter in the GovCon space to be successful in finding their people?
I think some of the same relatively generic advice still applies. Like you really need to understand what you're hiring for and why. And some of the really simple things, like what does success look like in this role, and how do you articulate that to somebody? Um, My understanding of the A&D space is that it's very incestuous, especially when you start looking at the large employers. Like people have probably worked at your organization before, or worked on one of the projects before if they have clearance. So, how are you going to talk about why this opportunity is different? How are you going to talk about the kind of work that you might be doing, the impact of that work, like what you're doing at Sandia National Laboratories versus what you're doing at Raytheon. They might be relatively the same job in terms of title and requirements, but they might be very, very different in terms of culture and values and the impact that your work might be having on a piece of tech, versus potentially national security. And finding people who actually want to do those things. So I think that really first step of truly understanding the opportunity, is something that's very important. And then it's how do you find net new talent? Are you able to go into a resume database and find the people that you're looking for? Do you have an ATS that lets you actually search and rediscover past talent? and re-engage those people who've previously put their hands up and said they're interested in your brand, but maybe didn't make it through the process? Or can you go out and find net new people through your own sort of OS sourcing techniques, or using a tool like SeekOut to be able to find talent that's maybe not getting pushed by every other recruiter, or has been overlooked by other people, or who isn't necessarily obvious in your space, and then sort of putting those very same building blocks together. Like, how do I get the right message to the right person at the right time to make that connection?
Awesome. Absolutely love that. And I know you guys are a little bit on the forefront of the AI and the ML space, but what's your thoughts on artificial intelligence across the entire recruiting industry?
It's an interesting space right now, and I think when people say artificial intelligence these days, a lot of the time they mean generative AI, so things like ChatGPT. I mean, we've been saying things like AI for a very, very long time, and it's only really since ChatGPT has AI become something that most people would consider very different. Um, I think that even though you should never say never, I struggle to see a world where recruiters are truly replaced by AI. Um, I can see it impacting a lot of other jobs, but ultimately we're people hiring people, and people working with other people. I don't think people want to be hired by a computer or by an algorithm. I don't think people want to work with a computer or an algorithm. This is ultimately a very social thing that we're doing. And personality and culture and values, fit and negotiation and influence, these are always going to be things that are incredibly important in the recruiting process, until we get to the point where nobody's actually working with anybody else anymore. Or I think the short-term impacts are probably gonna be here very soon. I think that we're probably gonna see very different ways of interacting with computer software very soon. I mean, look at ChatGPT, the essentially very first very good conversational user interface. You can talk to it and have an ongoing conversation, and it knows context, and it's not really artificial intelligence, but at least it pretends to be, and it's producing results. Bringing that to computer software as opposed to keyboard and mouse, or as opposed to the old style, drag and dictate voice recognition, is probably coming. And whether or not it sticks and people want to do it, I think it's too early to say. But I think there's very, very big changes to user interfaces coming soon. Um, and I think automation is going to get so much better very soon too. Like, we're already using a lot of automation in recruiting. You've got your applicant tracking system. You have your scheduling automation tools like Calendly. You have your email campaigns if you're out there doing sourcing. And these things have been proven to make a huge difference, right? Like a 4 to 6 step email campaign typically gets you a 30 to 40% better response rate than a single email. Everybody who does sourcing knows that. So what happens when you can take the power of AI and supercharge your automation to be doing more and more of these things? And that's really where I think we're going to see some of the largest benefits. For recruiters and for employers, I think the key is to really think about, if I use AI in this way, or if I automate this in this way, do I actually create a better candidate experience? Because in the end, that's all that matters. If you're not creating a better candidate experience, you're not going to get more hires. So if you're thinking, hey, I can use AI to do one-way video interviews for my applications, and get rid of my recruiting team, that doesn't create a better candidate experience. And you're not going to make good hires. But if you're thinking about, hey, I can use AI to automate my scheduling process so we don't have to send 5 emails backwards and forwards, and I can build out a 5 or 6 person interview in like a second, instead of the hour and a half it takes me right now, that's great for everybody. So I think that's the lens that people should be looking at these tools through. And I think those are the really short term advantages that we're going to see from AI in this year or two.
Awesome. Well, before we go to the quickfire questions, is there anything else you'd love to share about sourcing, seek out?
Um, I mean, it's a topic that I'm very passionate about. I think maybe it's come across in the conversation today, but I'll share my very controversial opinion about sourcing, which is that it is exactly the same regardless of the domain that you're working in. Sourcing a CFO is exactly the same as sourcing a software engineer, or as sourcing a frontline retail worker. It's the same process. It's the same understanding of the job. It's the same concept of the right message to the right person at the right time. Maybe you're just putting the bricks together in a slightly different process. I mean, a lot of people don't feel that way, but it's always something that I've thought was very true through all the recruiting work that I've done.
Awesome. Well, on to the quick fire questions, Ed.
Okay.
And real quick, like they don't have to be a quick answer. I recently renamed it the quick fire questions, and somebody just gave like 5-second answers one time. I'm like, no, like it's really just separating the podcast into actionable insights.
All right, let's do it.
What advice would you give to a brand new recruiter that's just getting started in our industry this year?
Pick up the phone call and talk to candidates. There is not a single thing about the role that you can't learn from talking to people who do the job at the moment and asking them what it would take to make them interested in a new opportunity. You learn the terminology, you learn the industries, you learn the benefits and employment salary packages that are out there. You've got to get in front of candidates and understand the market as deeply as you possibly can.
Awesome. What advice would you give to a recruiter that's, I don't want to say like been around the block, but has been in the industry 5, 10, 20, 25 years? What advice would you give them to continue to have success?
I think it's easy to get complacent. And that was something that I struggled with when I was a hands-on recruiter. You've been doing this for 10 years, and it's very easy to say, hey, you know what? I don't really need to do a great hiring manager interview. I have this intake meeting. I know this role backwards. We can just skip that. Or, hey, I don't really have to do an in-depth interview with this applicant. We can tell in the first 5 minutes if they're going to be a good fit or not. I think those things tend to sort of creep up on you when you're not paying attention. And often it's a sign of, unfortunately, having more work that you can get through as opposed to anything else. But it's those little details, and it's actually running through the process properly every time that make the biggest difference between success and failure.
Awesome. Has there been a book that has had a huge impact on your career?
For me, for a non-recruiting book, I really love Scaling Startups by Vern Harnish. It's a book that's been sort of republished a number of times that specifically talks about what it is that makes successful businesses grow and flourish while other organizations don't manage to reach that level of scale and success. And in their view, a lot of it actually comes down to organizational planning and strategy. Did you actually come up with a process and did you run it as opposed to just crossing your fingers and hoping that everything was going to be okay? And I remember the first time I read it, it got me to realize that there's an awful lot of figure crossing out there. And it really, really resonated with me in having a very deliberate and process driven approach to trying to reach success. Doesn't mean that you'll get it every time, but at least it means that you know that you've done the right things, or at least everything that you can do. Um, I've been a startup my entire career, never worked for a company larger than SeekOut. We're about 250 people at the moment. So it's something that resonated very strongly with me, and I try and bring to every role that I go to.
I feel like the next question, I might know the answer that you're going to say, but what is your favorite rec tech tool at the moment?
Okay, so we'll leave SeekOut out of it because that's just cheating. Um, I think there are some browser extensions out there that are supremely helpful. There's a bunch of different ones of these, but I have something called Extensify, which is a extension that lets you toggle other extensions on and off from the extension bar. So if you're like me, you have 40 different browser extensions installed, but you don't want them running all the time because they slow down your pages. You can just easily turn them on and off without going into the extensions. And the other one that I really love is something called Open Multiple URLs. And it's like 50 different versions of this in the extension store. But basically, when you click on it, it just opens up a text box, and you can drop as many URLs or even just a big block of text containing URLs into it, and press go, and it will extract all the web pages out and then pop them open in a new tab. So when you want to do something like go through 100 LinkedIn profiles, you can just copy and paste them out of Excel or whatever other tool you're using, drop them here, have them all open in the background, and then sort of go through them one by one to do whatever it is that you're trying to achieve.
That's cool.
Um, Outside of that, like everybody else, probably 80% of every recruiting organization I've ever worked in has run off Excel, regardless of what other kind of ATS or CRM we have in place. So I don't think spreadsheets are going anywhere anytime soon.
ChatGPT needs to help with spreadsheets.
Yes.
Awesome. So what do you think has been a huge part of your own personal success, career success?
I got into recruiting very late career. So I was already 30 when I became a recruiter, and had come out of quite a lot of other stuff in the startup space, in a previous life. When I the first agency that I joined, we had I think a really great training program for the first 2 weeks to sort of bring us up to their process. And at the end of that, one of our directors at the time, he came to the front of the room and said, "Hey, we leave this for the end, because if everything else is completely forgotten, there's one piece of advice we want you to remember. Um, if you just do what you said you were going to do when you said you were going to do it, you will be ahead of 99% of other people that you're competing against." And to be fair, I dismissed that when I heard it. Like that seemed like a ridiculous thing to say. Like, who's not doing what they said they were going to do? Uh, but as I matured, and as I experienced the industry firsthand, and as I went on to do lots of other things, I actually found a lot of people don't do what they say that they were going to. Whether it be a follow-up email, or sending that candidate submission when they said they would, or having the check-in call, or being on time, or literally any one of a million other things. The one thing that I've taken away, throughout my entire time since then is that that is actually very, very true. It applies to every single person in every single job. And if you just do what you said you were going to do when you said you were going to do it, you really will be ahead of 99% of the people that you're competing against.
That's great advice. The next question, I'm going to ask it two different ways, one
Okay.
in recruiting and one at the beginning of your career.
Mhm.
With everything that you know now, if you could go sit down with yourself when you just started out your career, even pre-recruiting, what advice would you give yourself?
Oh, that's a tough one. Um, also as a recruiter, I think at the very beginning of my career, I would have been more deliberate about finding a recruiting community, about finding subject matter experts who'd been there and done that, who knew more than I did, and could actually help show me the ropes and maybe skip many of the pitfalls, that I currently found myself on the way through. Even though I had colleagues and, at the time I was working for an agency, so there was quite a lot of internal knowledge sharing. I was never active in things like SourceCon or recruiting groups, for a number of years, after getting into the recruiting industry. Probably learned a lot of things the hard way because of that. So I think being more deliberate about finding subject matter experts and mentors is something that probably would have been a big help at the time. But perhaps I was a little bit too stubborn to realize back then.
Well, and that kind of jumps on another topic.
Yes.
Like, what is there? Hundreds of thousands of recruiters across the United
Mhm.
States. But if like, I feel like I'm tapped into a lot of the different like recruiting communities, and those recruiting communities are still small, but they're always giving information,
Mm.
always helping each other out. Like, why are so many other recruiters out there not jumping into some of these spaces and like up leveling themselves?
Yeah, it's a strange space, and it's one that I've spent a lot of time thinking about. I mean, we're definitely not all extroverts. There are a ton of introverted recruiters, and I'd put myself in that category as well. But we're definitely a group of people that seem to seek out networking opportunities, and community. I guess it's part of being successful at the role. It's so much of what we do in our day jobs, that you have to find a way of doing it outside of that too. But the recruiting communities are so fragmented. There's no central place to go for this sort of stuff. It all tends to be very role specific or very domain or region specific, often made up of pretty small groups. Um, I think they're hard to find. I think the barrier to entry can be a little bit high sometimes. It seems a little scary, maybe, to jump in as a newbie recruiter, when you've got Dean DeCostas and Glenn Gottmachers, posting in these groups. But I don't know. Maybe it is something that we can all work on making it more accessible. But it's an
Yeah,
interesting observation.
it's just a thought because I remember like, I mean, I think it was years. It was years of recruiting before I even found out about things like SourceCon. And, of course, like the group structure has changed with like social media. Social media has done a great job like creating that. But like, I think it was somebody on a phone call that told me like years ago, like, hey, there's a thing called SourceCon. I'm like, what's SourceCon? And I'm like, they're like, it's about sourcing. And I'm like, well, that sounds fun.
Yeah.
and ended up going to that event. And, personally, like I was a contractor at that point in time and, had to ask for the time off, which time off meant you didn't get paid. Paid for my own flight and everything. But, really touching into some of these communities, I will absolutely say changed my recruiting career. So,
It's one of the double-edged swords, I think, about our industry. On the one hand, the barrier to entry of being a recruiter is nothing. Like if you have a computer, a laptop, and a cell phone, you can be a recruiter. And there are, at least when we're in a better hiring cycle, there's no shortage of agencies and other organizations that take entry level people and give them the opportunity to do that role. Um, the flip side is there are very few people who do it really well. And there aren't a lot of really recognized places to go out and learn. Can't do an MBA course in recruiting. There's not a lot of online education that's like super high quality, especially when it gets into some of the really nitty gritty of the things that we do. If you weren't lucky enough to have really good mentorship, or just be able to figure it out for yourself from like first principles, it's very easy to get lumped into that unfortunate used car salesman stereotype that comes across in the industry. Um, I think I think education as a whole is something that we all need to work on. And I think it's something that would really benefit us, but of course, really benefit employers and candidates as well.
so well, Ed, this has been an amazing interview. Is there anything else that you'd love to share before I let you go?
I just really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you for inviting me on and listening to me prattle on about a whole bunch of stuff that hopefully somebody finds interesting. But appreciate the opportunity. It was fun chatting. Always love to try and share feedback and advice with other people in the industry, and hopefully somebody will find it useful.
Awesome, Ed. Well, for the listeners, just want to say thank you guys for listening. And until next time, guys.